كربلاء يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. يا غريب كربلاء يا مظلوم كربلاء يا شهيد كربلاء يا غريب كربلاء يا مظلوم كربلاء يا شهيد كربلاء. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين وعلى الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوات. صلى على محمد. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the chapter of An-Nahl, chapter 16, verse 125, He says, ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. صدق الله العلي العظيم. آمنا بالله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this beautiful verse, He says, call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good admonition. And when you speak to them, when you argue with them with righteousness. Don't argue for the sake of argument. From, inshallah, this verse, we get the topic of our lecture today, and that is dialogue, the art of dialogue. Our goal, inshallah, today is to understand the importance of this topic in our lives. Surely, we might find ourselves, if we're businessmen, generally in a state of negotiation, right? If we have children, we're constantly negotiating, even though we think we're commanding them to do things, but we're really negotiating with them, right? Because they come back to us and they tell us, but what about this? What about that? Is it okay if I do this and I'll do chores later on, right? So negotiating and having dialogue is part of our lives. We as Muslims come to Western countries and we open dialogue with people of other faiths, right? Whether it's in university when we first come, or it may be when we're in social gatherings, or it may be when we just met someone, or it may be that we're involved in interfaith dialogue and we go to synagogues, or we go to churches, or we go to people of different faith traditions. Dialogue is part of our lives every day. Now, this dialogue can be a one-sided dialogue, in which case it wouldn't be called dialogue anymore, right? Or it can be one where we can truly benefit. Both sides can benefit. The question is, how can we do that? And should we do that? And what is the benefit of doing that? In order to understand this, it's important first and foremost to go through a logical discourse of the importance of dialogue, whether truly it is important. Should I just have a one-sided conversation, not care what anybody else says? It's important first and foremost to go through, or should I really seek to understand of the importance of dialogue? And number two, it is important. Should I just have a one-sided conversation? Do psychologists say people are in the business of conflict resolution? Should I really seek to understand of the importance of dialogue? And number two, what does it? Should I just have one-sided conversation. Psychologists who are in the business. So when I look at these, should I really seek logical argument of whether or not dialogue? And number two, what this should I just have one-sided conversation? I find psychologists who are in the business. So when I start things, should I really seek logical argument? Always starting by setting a reference. And number two, with this, should I just have one-sided conversation? I find psychologists start out in the business. So when I start things, should I really seek logical argument? Always starting by setting a reference. And number two, with this, within ourselves, one-sided conversation. I find psychologists start out in the business. Everything else when I start things, should I really seek logical argument? Always starting by setting a reference. And number two, needs us within ourselves, other people around us. I find psychologists start out in the business. Everything else when I start things, logical. Could be our boss. And number two, needs us within ourselves. We know that our psychologists start out in the business. Everything else when I start things, logical. Could be our boss. It's most definitely. And number two, needs us within ourselves. We know that our psychologists start out in the business. Everything else when I start things, we realize logical. Could be our boss. It's most definitely. And number two, needs us within ourselves. We know that our psychologists start out in the business. All of us could be our boss. It's most definitely. And number two, needs us within ourselves. And so we know that our psychologists that is all of us could be our boss. It's most definitely. And number two, needs us within ourselves. So we know that our psychologists that is all of us could be our boss. It's most definitely. And number two, needs us within ourselves. So we know that our psychologists that is this I understand what I need is my life. Most definitely, my need and there is my creation. That's why we live. So now the question logically comes, this I understand what I need is my life. Most definitely, my need for the very purpose. That's why we live. So now the question logically comes, this I in this world, part of their purpose is my life. Most definitely, my need for the very purpose. That's why we live. So now the question logically comes, this I in this world, because each of us, though our ultimate is my life, for the very purpose. That's why we live. Part of that is logical. In order to achieve this world, because each of us, though our ultimate is my life, and that for the very purpose. That's why we live. Part of that is logical. In order to achieve this world, because each of us, though our ultimate is my life, and that for the very purpose. That's why we live. Part of that is logical. In order to achieve this world, because each of us, though our ultimate is my life, that's the very son, are you going to come by and see me today? Like, inshallah, if I have time. If I get out of work in time. If traffic isn't bad. If. Find all these excuses, right? So then bridging the gap, bridging the distance. Number 2, smiling. You know, researchers say that you can sense a smile over the phone. Think about it. When you're talking to someone and they're happy, you sense their happiness, right? You might not see them laughing or smiling, but you sense their energy, right? And when someone is sad, even if they're not saying much, you can tell. You say, "You sound sad today." Right? These are all things that we feel and we sense, and they're all logical things, unfortunately, that we recognize, but we don't do anything about. Right? So I bridge the gap. I approach with a smile, right? I greet them with the greeting of peace, right? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Or a simple hi. You know, my name is. Don't think that they have to introduce themselves first. You introduce yourselves, right? My name is Fulan, right? What's your name? People like it when you know their names, even if you forget, as long as you're humble enough to keep asking, right? So there's a necessity for me to create this sense of getting to know people, because we, as human beings, are created to be part of a family, right? Think about it. In order for us to come to this world, we have to have parents, which means there has to be a family. We have to grow up in a family. And if we're several families, then we become a community. And if we're several communities, then we become a society, right? So that sense of creating family is very important. Now, some family is by blood, and some family is not by blood. How? Friends. In Arabic, we say, there's a famous saying, رُبَّ أَخٍ لَكَ لَمْ تَلِدْهُ أُمُّكَ, right? Sometimes you have a brother that is not from your mother, right? Right? I'm not talking Islam or religion yet. I'm just talking, rational, logical discourse, right? If I want to create a community, we always think that creating a community is just about our own enclosed Islamic Shia community. But our community is much bigger and much greater than that, right? Being welcoming to others and bringing others. I see communities that invite people to iftar all the time. I see communities that open up their mosques for, guided tours, right? This is important to create a sense of a greater community, a sense of a greater responsibility towards humanity, right? Okay, so we established then rationally, it's important for us to connect with other people. And to connect with other people, we have to talk. A simple gesture we find, like when Brother Nima comes towards us men, As-salam, just his hands out like this. Brother Shahrukh, the same thing when he does this. First thing he does is he always sighs, right? And you know, what's he going to say next and what's coming your way? A big, huge amount of love and caring, right? It's a beautiful thing. And we all feel good about it, right? But how many of us can actually do that? And all it is a choice. It's a choice. Now the next thing is, once I've established that connection, the more excitement we show in meeting someone, sincerely, of course, not fake, right? Sincerely. What happens then is what? Is that sincerity transcends to the other person. It's transferred. That body language is communicated right away, right? It's received positively. And then the other person, their guards come down too. Their guard comes down right away. So what happens then is they're more willing to get to know you. They're more willing to hear. They're more willing to listen, right? So then, logically speaking, one of the most important rules of dialogue is to be friendly, to be cordial, right? The next thing that I need to do, logically, of course, is that once I start the conversation, I need to listen. Because, I recognize one thing. That the only way that I was able to come to my Lord is to listen to what's inside of me. To be introspective. So if I want to listen to my environment and those around me, if I want to understand my environment and what's around me, just like I understood my Creator and that He truly exists and He's unlimited, I have to zip this and open these up and open up my heart. Right? Which means I have to have sincerity towards Allah's creations. Just like I had sincerity in knowing Allah, I have to have the same sincerity in knowing humans. Why? Because I recognize that when Allah created an existence on this earth, what happened? He did something really beautiful. He gave them the opportunity to know Him. And He gave that existence the opportunity to know all the other creations around them and to try to get to their worth. So what am I going to do? I'm going to be sincere and I'm going to zip this for a bit, open this up and open this up. Open up my heart. You say, but Sheikhna, my heart has been broken too many times. Baba, I didn't say fall in love. Right? I said open up your heart just like you open up your home to guests. We are all hosted by Allah in this world. Should we not be just as generous as He is to other human beings? Think about it. Logically speaking, it's a logical necessity for us to do this. And now, what am I going to do? I'm going to listen to other people just like Allah listens to me. My priority. Allah listens to me. I talk and I talk. I talk and I Instagram and I Snapchat and I Facebook and I do all of this stuff. Some of it good, some of it bad. Sometimes I say things I shouldn't say. But Allah, He listens. But I find it hard to listen to my own children. How do you expect me to listen to a stranger? Right, Hajj Mustafa. Of course, Hajj Mustafa is not like that. He has an open heart for everyone. There's nobody here that's like that. But the logical discourse helps us to recognize certain truths that maybe really haven't hit home. Right? You know, many of us, we say, Islam tells me to do this. Islam tells me to do that. But if my tawheed is weak, then you know what? Inshallah, 16 Islam comes to us, 60 Islams comes to us, we still won't follow. We'll still say that we're Muslims by name, but by action we're not doing it. Right? This is why tawheed is so important, by the way. Because Allah wants us to act like muwahhideen. Surah Al-Ikhlas that says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ is called Ikhlas. Ikhlas is sincerity. Imam Ali says, أول الدين معرفته, the first of religion is to know Him. وكمال معرفته التصديق به. The best of ways of knowing Him is to do what? Is to prove His existence. وكمال تصديقه توحيده. And the best way to prove His existence is through tawheed. To prove that He's unlimited. وكمال توحيده, he says, and the best form of tawheed is al-ikhlas lah, is to have sincerity towards Him. So to have sincerity towards Him means you have to have sincerity towards His creations. And you have to listen with sincerity. Just like He allows you to talk. Listen. Right? When we listen to others, you know what happens? We open up our horizons. When we open up our horizons, what happens? We'll learn something new. Many of us, we think we can't learn something new from someone else. You'd be surprised. We know we're not perfect, right? We know we're limited, right? How do you know that that person hasn't done something better than you? How do you know that that person wasn't kinder than you? You might have been a Muslim, but you might have been harsh with your kids. That person, his kids are around him all the time. You could learn from him maybe. How is it that their kids are around them all the time? You say, well, no, because they drink with them. How do you know? Maybe they don't drink with them. Maybe there's a friendship between them. Right? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Maybe I should establish a friendship between me and my kids too. Right? Maybe that's what I need. Maybe I didn't pay attention to what Islam tells me there, but I could learn something here. You can always learn something. Imam Ali says, he says it beautifully. He says that you can, he says, Al-hikmatu dhalatul mu'min. He says wisdom is something that a believer always searches for, wherever it may be, even if it's in the hands or the heart of a disbeliever. Right? Okay, so logically speaking then, I have to bridge the gap, number one. Two, I have to approach with a smile. Number three, I have to greet the person well. Number four, I have to be sincere and open up my heart. Number five, I have to listen, right? Number six, I don't have to talk while they're talking. Right? I don't have to. Right? This is something we all have to train to do. Right? Don't listen this way. Don't listen by having a million answers in your head, because you're not really listening, right? Be mindful. Listen wholeheartedly, with sincerity. When we say listen with sincerity, we mean let go of any preconceived notions and just listen to what the person has to say. Right? Don't think of 1,000 answers and wait to interrupt them. Let them finish. Give them that common decency. And then, obviously, what should you do? You should, ask them, are you done when they're done? When they're done, right, ask them, I just want to understand what you said. People like others to confirm, to affirm what they told them, right? It's just like at work, right? When you tell your employee or your boss tells you to do something, they like to hear you repeating what you said. They like to see you write things down, first of all. Oh, yeah, I didn't get that. Could you repeat that for me, please? Right. Okay, so let me review. Are we done? Yeah. Okay, let me review. Do you mind if I just repeat the points that you mentioned just to make sure that I get it right? It's just, it's within us that we want to feel that confirmation from other people. Why not give that to people? There's nothing wrong with that. We want it. We expect it. Let's give it to other people, right? The next thing is, make sure you bring in information that's relevant to them when you talk to them, right? Don't bring in information that's irrelevant to them. Things that they understand, not things that they don't understand, right? Like if they don't understand French, don't talk to them in French, right? Make sense? If they haven't read a book, right, then don't quote that book. Quote a book that maybe they have read. Unless you know for a fact that this information is going to benefit them, then quote the book, because they're going to ascribe to this school of thought maybe, or to this author, right? Understand their body language and understand their environment and what appeals to them, right? Then what you'll find is they'll be more receptive to you. So this is the logical discourse. Let's move on to what psychologists tell us and what sales force people tell us, right? So in psychology today, it mentions that there are 7 rules to conflict resolution. 17 rules to conflict resolution. I'm not going to go through all of them, okay? But I'll mention a few. The first thing that it says in conflict resolution in psychology today, it says, do not approach the situation aggressively, which means let your guard down a little. Okay? Number 1. Number 2, it says listen. It says listen, don't talk first, just listen. Number 3, it says make sure you write the points that you heard. Number 4, it says seek to understand, which means ask the other person, right, if you understood their points fully. Number 5, it says make sure that when you come to the meeting, this is in conflict resolution, of course, when two people are in conflict, right, which is the worst case scenario. Okay, so if we take the worst case scenario, then the best case scenario would be easier for us, right, Haj Hassan? So it says come prepared with the points that are important to you, right, and what points that are extra that you can forgo, that you're okay with disagreeing on, okay, if the other person doesn't agree with, right? And then what it says is make sure that you, so far we're on point number 6, right? So it says make sure that you, after all these points, make sure that when you start talking, okay, that person also understands what you expect of them. So you say to them, listen, I gave you the respect, I took down all these notes, and I wanted to really understand what you had to say, right? And now I want you to make sure that you also give me the same, extend to me the same courtesy. Most likely they'll do that. It's just that if you don't notice them doing that, it's good to let them know, just so that they're aware, right? Now, the next resource that I want to use is actually by Harvard Press. It's their book on negotiation, okay? And they mention 4 important points in negotiation. The most important points that I want to talk about, right? Because they talk about coming in with all of the points that are necessary to you, and come in with more than what you need. In a negotiation, you always come asking more than what you really want, right? So you always have a list of the main points and the things you need to forgo. It says if you reach a stalemate, what you need to do is ensure that you're a little lenient, be a little flexible, okay, on certain things. Try to understand the other's viewpoint. It says that the third thing that you should do is that you should make sure that whatever resolution you come to is a win-win. It says be a dolphin. The reason why they say be a dolphin is because dolphins can survive within an environment that's surrounded by seals and sea lions and kale, and the seaweed, I mean, not kale. And it can survive in an environment that has sharks in it, right? So it says be a dolphin, meaning what? Meaning be flexible, okay? And finally, always look for the win-win. Always look for both sides to win. Don't just look for you to win and the other person to lose. So these are the major 4 rules of negotiation that we learned from this Harvard Press book, Negotiation. There's another important point for us to understand when it comes to negotiation. There's 2 types of negotiations. One negotiation is called a type of negotiation, which means that you're not going to budge. You're coming in, you know what you want, right? So when I come and talk to Hajj Mustafa, right, what I'm going to talk to him about is certain points that I want from him, and I'm not really listening to him, right? I'm just seeking to win and for him to lose, period, right? But Hajj Mustafa, he has a much better personality and character than I do. So he wants to make sure that we both win. So what does he do? He's more lenient, right? So what he does is he has more of an integrative, which is the second type, form of negotiation or dialogue when he talks to me. He says, listen, we can both win, right? You can get what you want and I can get what I want, okay? Now, there's a man by the name of Peter Baron Stark. He mentions several points when it comes to the issue of negotiation and conflict resolution. He says, and you're going to find that these points are repetitive. Number 1, he says, come in with an open mind. Number 2, he says, make sure that you know the points that are important to you. Number 3, he says, seek to have a win-win situation. Number 4, make sure you know what you're not willing to budge on, right? Number 5, he says, keep an open mind. I'm going to stay at 5. Keep an open mind, okay? Now let's see what Islam says. So far, we've had several views. Psychology Today, Harvard Press Negotiation, the 15 Rules of Negotiation by Peter Baron Stark. And actually, there's one more person I'd like to mention. He's a very famous salesperson. Because when we come and approach someone, we're really selling ourselves. Think about it, right? We're selling our ideas. We're selling our thoughts. We're selling our character, right? So this man, he's right now probably one of the leading Salesforce trainers out there. His name is Grant Cardone. Okay, he's published. He's all over YouTube. He's been featured on CNN and featured in many publications. And he's an interesting character. He's a salesperson by trade. Okay, and he has 4 rules of selling, or afwan, 3 rules of selling. He says the first thing that you have to know is what it is that you want to sell. You have to know the background of what you're going to sell. He says number two, you have to know who you're selling to. The person you're approaching, the company you're approaching, you have to know their background, what their interest is. Because there's no point in you selling them something they don't need. You have to find out what they need and supply that demand. Right? Finally, he says, get it in writing. That one's not important to us right now. Okay? But those two that he mentioned, the first 2 points, these are essential to us. Right? Know what you want, right? And know what they want. Now, sometimes he says, when you go into a sale, you think they need something, but it turns out they don't. Most of the time, when a person you're trying to sell your product to doesn't want to buy it, is because they don't understand the value to them. So that means you have to ask them questions. Listen to them, just like it said in the conflict resolution and 15 points on negotiation by Peter Baron Stark. You have to listen to them, ask them questions, listen, ask questions, listen, and figure out if the product you have doesn't match their needs, then figure out what product does match their needs. Right? Okay, so now let's move on to Islam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. So the holy verse we started out with from Surah Al-Nahl, verse 125, it says, ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. What does it say? It says, call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good admonishment, which means advice, right? And then it says what? It says, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. If you're going to argue with them or have a dialogue, right? Make sure that you take the high ground. Not, that doesn't mean raise your nose, and feel prideful, right, towards them. That's not what it means. It means that be righteous towards them, right? So if they say something bad, say something good, right? If they're unkind, you be kind, right? If they need a hug, give them a hug. Okay? Of course, guys to guys and girls to girls, right? Unless they're mahram. Okay? So this verse is key to our understanding of what Islam tells us about negotiating, conflict resolution, and dialogue. It says the most important thing is that when you approach someone, make sure you use wisdom. What does Allah mean by wisdom here? Right? Imam Ali, he explains it. He says, Al-hikmatu dhallatul mu'min, right? He says that wisdom is something that a believer is always searching for. So don't think that the only wisdom you're going to get is from a Muslim. You can get wisdom also from a disbeliever, right? We know because we go to universities every day, right? We become engineers and lawyers and doctors. So we know that there's wisdom outside of Islam too, right? So the next thing that I have to understand is this wisdom. What is it? Wisdom is an understanding of my environment, an understanding of what I need and what others need of me, right? And how to fulfill that. And first and foremost, I understand wisdom by understanding my Lord. This is why Tawheed becomes important. This is why Imam Ali says, أَوَّلُ الدِّينِ مَعْرِفَتُهُ. The first of religion is to know Him. But that's really interesting. So I've come to understand Allah through my logical discourse. But how can I apply this now in Islam to reach wisdom? Notice the logical discourse made me wise to realities in this world, right? To understanding everybody's place in this world, right? Now what's interesting here is that in order for me to be wise, what do I need to do? I need to look at the most important figures in Islam and see how they dealt with things and what they say about wisdom. Prophet Muhammad, Allah says in the Holy Quran, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. He says, and you had in the messenger of Allah a great example, a great exemplar. Which means that I should look at the Prophet and see how he dealt with people. I see that even with his enemies, he was good. Think about it. when he would go off to Ta'if, right, to preach and let them know about Allah, they would stone him. He would come back to Lady Khadija. He would be bleeding. She would say to him, why do you keep going back? He says, they don't know. Allah says, وَهَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Do those of knowledge equate with those without knowledge? So now when I deal with disbelievers, I have to know. When I deal with them, they don't know. Right? And there may be some things that I don't know too. That's number one. Number two, and that's part of wisdom, by the way, to know that not everybody knows what you know, and there are some things that you don't know too. So humble yourself, right? Number two, Imam Ali says something really beautiful. He says, احذر من فراسة المؤمن فإنه يرى بعين الله. He says, beware of the insight of a believer, for he sees proverbially with the eyes of Allah. A believer is in tune not only with other believers, right? He's in tune with everything, with his environment. He looks for opportunities. Remember what we mentioned the other day? As a believer, you understand that every single breathing moment is an opportunity. So you look for opportunities. So if I see, for example, brother Hajj Kazim, right? And I see maybe he's not smiling as much today as he normally does. I think to myself, maybe today he's not as happy because maybe something happened. Or maybe something's on his mind. So what do? I sense that, right? So I try to be extra cheerful with him. I try to talk to him, right? And I try to take a load off of him, right? The same applies to people who are not Muslim or not mu'mineen, right? But by priority, al-aqrabuna awla bil-ma'ruf, Islam tells us. So I start with those closer to me, right? So who do I start with first? If al-aqrabuna are awla bil-ma'ruf, I start with my own kids, my own family, right? And then I move on to my community, to those in my workplace and society as a whole. Rules of dialogue in Islam. Prophet Muhammad, because we said, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Allah says in the Holy Quran that in the Prophet you have a great exemplar. Rules of dialogue. 5 groups of people approach him. This is mentioned in the book of Al-Ihtijaj, volume 1, the very first Ihtijaj. The dialogues or the debates or the proofs. 5 groups come to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They say to him, if you follow what we follow, then we are your allies. If not, we're your enemies. The disbelievers come to him. A group called the Dahriyun, that believe that the world is everlasting. A group called the Zoroastrians, right? Zaradashtiya, right? Those who believe in the power of darkness and light. They believe that there are 2 gods. And then you have the Jews and the Christians, right? When the Jews and the Christians, we'll just look at them. When the Jews and the Christians come to him, he says, of course, to all of them, he says, do you want me to believe in what you believe in without you telling me what you believe? Notice, what's the first thing he does? He asks a question. Right? Even if he's approached aggressively, what does he do? He humbles himself. He doesn't say, you're wrong. He humbles himself, right? What does he do? How does he humble himself? He asks a simple question. Right? Tell me what you believe. Do you mind? Automatically, when they see him humbled, and he doesn't have to, he's the seal of prophets, he's the best creation, right? But he humbles himself. What do? They say, oh, yeah, of course, we'll tell you. We don't want you to believe in what we believe in without you knowing, right? So they sit with him, and what does he do? He closes his mouth, he opens his blessed mouth, he opens his blessed ears, and he opens his blessed heart. And he listens to them with sincerity. And he lets them finish, right? So he asks a question. He listens. Once they're done, he says, are you done? He asks another question. Humbles himself in front of them again. He doesn't have to, right? Look at the example, the supreme example. The next thing that he does is after he asks that question, he says, do you mind if I tell you what I understood from what you said? Isn't that beautiful? Prophet Muhammad. He's reviewing to them what they believe. They say, no, not at all. Go ahead. So to the Jews, he says to them, you said that you believe that Ezra is the son of God, right? They said, yes. He said, do you believe that Ezra is a prophet? They said, no. He said, do you believe that Ezra spoke to God? They said, no. He said, okay, well, Do you believe that Moses is your prophet? They said yes. Do you believe that Moses spoke to God? They said yes. He said, well, isn't Moses then more likely to be the prophet, to be the son of God than Ezra? They said, He didn't give them Quran. He talked to their own logic. He saw their situation. Imam Ali says, حَدِّثُ النَّاسَ عَلَى قَدْرِ عُقُولِهِمْ. Speak to people in accordance with their intellect. This means their environment, their state of being, right? You need to do your due diligence, your homework. And you can only do that by listening, first and foremost, and understanding, right? So seek to understand before being understood. Now once he did that, what happens? Some of them, they conceded. They said, that's a good point. But we only call him the son of God because, he revived the Torah. I said, well, why don't you call him the uncle of God or the brother of God? That got them thinking. Some said, you know what, we're your sworn enemy. Others said, you know what, that's a good point. Let's talk some more. Right? At the end of the road, when he left them and they left him, right? He wasn't holding up a sword and saying, that's it, we're sworn enemies. They said we're sworn enemies, those who were angered with him. But you know what he did? جَادَلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Right? Which means what? Which means that when he talked to them, he was more righteous. He said, لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. As the verse of Kafirun says, right? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدتُّمْ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. Oh, you who disbelieve, right? I don't worship what you worship. You don't worship what I worship. We don't worship what each other worship. Okay? You have your religion, I have my religion. No sweat. Allah even says to the Prophet, He says, look, وَإِن كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. He says, look, if you were harsh-hearted and crude with them, they would leave your side. So it can't be that the Prophet is harsh-hearted. He has to be lenient. That's why we have a beautiful narration by Prophet Muhammad. You know what he says? He says, الْمُؤْمِنُونَ هَيِّنُونَ لَيِّنُونَ. We always remember this one narration. الْمُؤْمِنُونَ حَلَوِيُّونَ. No. That believers love sweets. No. Prophet Muhammad says, الْمُؤْمِنُونَ هَيِّنُونَ لَيِّنُونَ. He says that believers are easygoing and lenient. When they meet people, they don't meet them with a grimaced face. They meet them with an open face and a smile. They don't meet them with arms crossed. Right? They meet them with welcoming arms. Right? They don't meet them with closed hearts. They meet them with open hearts. They're not insincere. They're sincere. Just as they are sincere to their Lord. Because they want them to benefit just as they benefit. Right? So inshallah, this is the Islamic perspective. We understand then that Islamically speaking then, what the Prophet has taught us through the rules of dialogue is exactly what logic dictated, exactly what after 1400 years and so many studies in the halls of academia that the people in the sales force and psychologists and people dedicated to dialogue and conflict resolution have been able to come to. But 1400 years ago, the Prophet was already doing this. What a beautiful, complete, wholesome religion we have if we only apply it. Right? And there's one hadith I want to leave you with. And this is really essential to our dealing with others. The second hadith in the book of Al-Kafi is a hadith in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends Jibreel alayhi salam to Prophet Adam. يرحمكم الله. صلوا على محمد وآله. In that narration it states that when Allah sent Jibreel down to Adam after he first created him, he said to him, Allah sent me to you with three things: intellect, al-aql, deen, religion, and haya, which is shyness, a sense of shame and shyness. He says, Allah commands you to choose one out of the three. So he says, I choose intellect. Then Jibreel alayhi salam tells religion and haya and shyness to go back from where they came. You know what they respond to Jibreel? They said, no, Allah commanded us to be with the intellect wherever it is. إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَمَرَنَا أَن نَكُونَ مَعَ الْعَقْلِ أَيْنَمَا كَانَ. Allah commanded us to be with the intellect wherever it goes, which means one cannot be an intellectual without having religion. And one cannot be religious without having haya, without having shyness. One cannot be religious without shyness and a good, rational, wise personality. The more I gain in knowledge, the more religious I become. That's how it should be. If I gain knowledge and that pushes me away from Allah, then that means I have no shyness and I have no religion. That means my aql is actually weak. Just because I got a master's and a PhD, right, in the dung beetle. I know someone who has a PhD in the dung beetle. Doesn't make you knowledgeable in the ways of the world. You learned something small in this world. Imagine how much more you need to learn. And I'll tell you a simple story. One time, a few years ago, we had a relative who passed away. Someone comes, and it was my father-in-law's father who had passed away. People were coming in, and we were serving them. I was serving them dates and chai and tea. The door knocks. Two people come at the door. One person we know, the other person is new. They introduce him as Dr. Fulan. So we said, Ahlan wa sahlan. Please come in. He sat down. My father-in-law, he likes doctors. So he asked the doctor, and he had diabetes at the time. So he asked the good doctor, he said, Doctor, I have diabetes. Can I eat dates? He said, of course, they're natural. Eat dates. So he ate dates. Kept on eating dates. Now after a few minutes, the door knocks. Who is it? It's his GP, his family doctor. He comes in. He gives his condolences. And then he looks really shocked. He looks at the plate in front of my father-in-law. And he sees him taking another date. He says, what are you doing? He said, what? I'm eating dates. He said, but you have diabetes. He said to him, yeah. But the good doctor said, I can eat dates. They're natural. So he looks towards that doctor. He says to him, Doctor, what kind of doctor are you? The guy next to him says, he's a doctor in history. The point is this, is that you never have enough knowledge. Prophet Muhammad says, Min al-mahdi ila al-lahd. Right? From cradle to grave. We're always gaining knowledge. And the more knowledge we gain, the more we should be humbled. Not the more prideful we should get. Right? Because that tells us there's more knowledge for us to learn. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. You know, I want to take us back to Karbala and actually back to Medina, because that's where we were. This is where Sayyidah Zainab is now. This is where the caravan is back there, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. And I want to leave one image with you. They're back, right? They had camped outside. Now they came into Medina. Muhammad ibn Hanafiya comes out. All of the women and children come out. And they're all going towards Sayyidah Zainab and Imam Zain al-Abidin. They all want to know what happened to Imam al-Hussein. But there's one individual that we still haven't mentioned. This little girl who, when Imam Hussein salamullahi alayhi wanted to leave and go towards Karbala, he would visit. This little girl was Fatima al-Alila, his little daughter. Imam Hussein salamullahi alayhi had left her with Salama, whom he had left with a small qarura, a small vase that had the sand of Karbala. And he told her that when this turns red, know that I have been martyred. Salama had seen the sand of Karbala in that jar turn red. She knew that Imam Hussein was martyred. But Fatima al-Alila, she didn't know that her father was martyred. And so when she heard that her aunt Sayyidah Zainab was coming, and that her brother Imam Zain al-Abidin was coming, she ran out so that she can see them and she can ask them, where's my father? Some narrators say that when she came out asking, where is my father, she saw her uncle Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. And when she asked him, his heart couldn't let her know what had happened to her dad. They say that when she saw Sayyidah Zainab, they say that when she saw Sayyidah Zainab, she said, she called out to her aunt. She said, Ammati Zainab, Aina Abi? Where's my father? I don't see him among you. Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, she puts her hand down. Imam Zain al-Abidin, seeing her, he puts his hand on her forehead. The narrators say, some of them, they say, at this point, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah also put his hand on the foreheads of all of the children that had come back with Sayyidah Zainab. Fatima al-Alila, looking so innocent, she looks at her aunt and she says, Ammati, Aina Abi al-Husayn? Where is my father Hussein? She would put her head down and say to her, your father Hussein was martyred on the land of Karbala. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل بيت رسول الله إلى أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. غريب كربلاء مظلوم كربلاء شهيد كربلاء السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you. Bika ya Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah. We ask you by all those who are martyred on the land of Karbala. We ask you, Fatima al-Alila and all the orphans of Karbala, ya Allah. We ask you, all those orphans around the world, from the mu'mineen and mu'minat, all those in Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and Syria and Bahrain, all those orphans whose parents were slaughtered, Ya Allah, for fighting in the name of Al-Imam Al-Hussein, all those who protected the shrines, Ya Rabb Al-Alameen. Oh Allah, protect them, Ya Allah. Help us be of those that take care of the orphans, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you, by Imam Zain al-Abidin Ali al-Karbala, that you give health to all our sick, Ya Rabb. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you, all those who are in debt, that you repay their debts, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you, all those that have a need, that you fulfill their needs by these nights. بحق الأربعين يا رب العالمين. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you, that all those whose faith is weakened, that you strengthen their faith, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you, that you help us become the best representatives of Islam on this earth, that you allow us to have open hearts and open arms and open minds, that you allow us, Ya Rabb al-Alameen, to improve our intellects and to always be humble, Just like Imam Zayn al-Abidin was humble, and as Sayyidah Zainab was humble, Ya Rahman. Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you support all those volunteers and all those founders of centers such as this one in the past, today and in the future. And that you allow us, Ya Rabbil Alameen, to always commemorate the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein and Ahlul Bayt and the tragedy that they went through. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you hasten the appearance of Imam al-Hujjah and you make us of his companions. Ya Rabbil Alameen. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين والفاتحة على أرواح المرحومين مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.